Good evening, and thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Alex Taddeo, and I'm the program coordinator and advisor for Huxley College on the Peninsulas. We are an extension of Huxley College of the Environment offered in Bellingham, and we offer environmental degree options to the greater Puget Sound region with our campuses in Everett, Poulsbo, and Port Angeles. We are excited to celebrate Earth Day with all of you by hosting several speakers for our Earth Week series in collaboration with Western Washington University Alumni Office and Huxley College of the Environment. To kick off the Earth Week series, I'm excited to welcome our speaker for tonight, Laura Super. Laura is Program Director for the Methow Valley Citizens Council, MVCC, an environment community advocacy nonprofit organization based in Twisp, Washington. Laura works closely with MVCC's Executive Director and Board of Directors to develop the organization's level of engagement and strategy across the range of issues MVCC addresses. With a strong focus on land use planning, water law, and public lands management, Laura's work involves significant collaboration and problem solving with local communities, nonprofit organizations, and government officials. She cultivates and manages teams that include board members, staff, volunteers, and contractors to implement MVCC's programs and ensure their effective delivery. Laura has also volunteered since 2010 as a state-appointed supervisor for the Okanogan Conservation District. She and her family live on a small farm near the town of Metho. I'll be monitoring the chat for questions, and I will relay any to her when it's time for the Q&A. I now pass it on to Laura.
Oops, I was muted. Hi, thank you, and welcome and happy Earth Week. I'm honored to help kick off the week with a presentation about how one part of the state is trying to address limits to growth, specifically through the lens of water. Now I need to deal with technical issues. There we go. So first, it's important for me to acknowledge that the land I'm speaking about is the traditional homeland of the Methow people, who are now part of the Colville Confederated Tribes. The Methow people cared for and stewarded this place long before the arrival of European settlers, and they continue to care about the land and their traditional lifeways. Today, the sovereign nations of the Colville Confederated Tribes and the Yakima Nation both have strong ties through traditional hunting and fishing associations and treaties, and they're both very much engaged in water and land use planning efforts. Also, if I didn't personally take a photo you see in the slideshow, it will have a credit with one exception. Some photos in this slideshow were borrowed from the Meadow Conservancy, which also provided some demographic data that I'll be using. They are preparing an upcoming presentation that dives deeper into the growth patterns of the Methow. The Methow Watershed Council also provided information for upcoming slides related to the Methow in-stream flow rule. So there's a lot to cover here, and I don't want to go too fast, so we'll get moving. Oh, also one quick note on the postcard there. I try to carry that with me and have it near every desk that I sit at because it's so relatable. So I work for the Methow Valley Citizens Council. We're a membership organization that started in 1976 with a diverse group of locals that met in somebody's living room after the Aspen Ski Corporation proposed a destination ski resort that threatened to drastically change the pace of life in the valley. A 20-year battle ensued up to the US Supreme Court before the case was won by MVCC. That work set the tone for the organization's future role as watchdogs of land use and water activities. It also set the tone for more proactive community work to do better at planning ahead and making the best use of things like zoning and comprehensive planning, to name a couple. MVCC now has around 800 members in the valley and around the state. 1,300 people subscribe to our online newsletter. We have expanded our programs to include work on public land management, air quality, and also climate resilience. We collaborate a lot with other groups in the valley and around the state. So getting this stuff right is really the work of many and not few. Here's a little map of the Methow Valley in proximity with Seattle. The communities in red are the upstream communities I'm speaking about in this presentation. There's a few more unincorporated towns in the Methow going south towards Pateros, where the mouth of the Methow River meets the Columbia. Upstream communities in this region are also defined as any community in the Columbia Basin that has headwaters across state or national lines or up in the mountains, as in the case of the Methow. So the Methow varies widely from north to south and from east to west, from high alpine snowpack in the Cascades to dry shrub steppe where the mouth of the river meets the Columbia. Compared to our average flow in the Methow River of around 2,100 cubic feet per second, the average annual flow at the Columbia by comparison is around 89,000 CFS. Virtually all of the water in the river and in the ground comes from snowpack at the Cascade crest or on the valley floor. Historically, the river flows have been very low in late summer and also in midwinter, which, as you'll see, is problematic for salmon and also for people. A part of the upper watershed near Mazama regularly dries up completely. That means the river goes dry. There's just a gravel bed there up at the top. Over 80% of the watershed is in public ownership, which makes our community very interested in what happens on public lands, and also highlights the importance of getting our planning right on the private land, which mostly includes the valley floor and lower reaches of subdrainages. The valley's economy has changed between the 1970s and the present from a resource extractive economy of timber and mining to a tourism-based economy for the most part. Since the start of COVID, we are also a Zoomtown economy, meaning a lot of people have moved to their sometimes palatial second homes to work remotely. And here's our watershed broken up into 7 reaches. More on this in a little bit. Water is life, as the saying goes. It really rings true here. People in the Methow value self-sufficiency and resilience. We want to grow our own food. Sometimes we have to fight our own fires. Endangered fish and other wildlife depend on access to the river corridor and also the creeks for habitat. Diving a little deeper into the farms of the Methow, I'm not talking about commodity agriculture, though the farms shown in the following slides and other like them are providing goods and services ranging from beef and pork and lamb and goat cheese to heirloom veggies and other value-added food products. They provide these to the Puget Sound region, Spokane, and beyond. Our farms are small but mighty, supplying both regional markets and local food banks consistently. This is just a small sample I decided to throw together. Last summer, local farms donated 5,000 pounds of food to the food bank in the middle of the pandemic, with fires burning to our east. In recent years, we've seen more and more young farmers attracted to the area, which seems a different trend than many other places where the farming population is aging and not being replaced by young farmers. There's many opportunities to purchase local food and consume it or share it with your neighbors. You can buy it all around the region. And here's where we're at as a valley in a nutshell. It's a complex and beautiful place with pressing problems that I will start to unpack. So all of these points will be revisited. Our recent explosion of growth has the potential to impact our farms, wildlife, fire danger, and life as we know it. Not just because of escalating land values and the pressure to convert ag lands to residential uses, but also because of limited water, as you'll see. The photo here is from a mailer I got from a local realtor last fall that shows that there was a 40% increase in sales since 2019, and an increase in sales prices by at least 10%. The figures don't account for the amount of new building that's been taking place. And that's also had a major impact on the valley. The past year has seen massive home developments creeping up the shores of the Columbia River from Wenatchee and taking over orchards and fields. As you can see, these are also not exactly what you would call affordable homes for most folks. About 4 miles from the mouth of the Methow River, you can see the same pattern creeping up the valley. This is a very recent development, and all of these houses went in virtually at the same time and alarmed a lot of folks. And here's a sweet little reminder of the land use patterns preferred by most people here, about 12 miles up the valley. This photo was taken 3 years ago. And so there's already probably a dozen new homes, a gravel pit, and several roads. If I were to take the same picture today, down below is the little hamlet of Methow. According to this figure by the Methow Conservancy, between 2005 and 2020, pre-COVID, the valley experienced 31% growth. 1,000 new homes were constructed during that time. The change in ratio of part-time homes shows that people were already starting to move into their second homes as a full-time residence, and this has definitely been exacerbated with COVID. The Zoom boom has also had an impact on wildlife as recreation expands and crowds are getting into once quiet places at alarming rates. So in the last few years, a perfect storm has really formed in this valley and led us to a point of crisis in managing our limited private land base, our limited water supply, and balancing these against the vision that the community has for itself, as opposed to the vision that might be imposed on us just by sheer economic force. On the question of what we can do, my experience of what limits growth has included all of these limits in equal measure. I put climate change in there, even though it fits under ecological constraints, because it is also really about the future constraints across the range of all of these concerns. It really gets its own category. Under the banner of community vision and values, plans and regulations are guided by public processes when things go right. And so this slide shows a sampling of the many public processes that have taken place in our valley since 1976 related to resource management and land use planning. Public comment periods, hearings, and the legislative process are guided by participation that lets everyone articulate what is important to them and their vision for the future. What I've noticed from reviewing past and recent planning efforts is a surprisingly consistent tone in community values and concerns, despite the passage of time and changing demographics. These concerns and desires have been consistently expressed in every process noted in the last slide, and probably others. Even as the population has changed, people tend to come here for the same reasons and share the same worries. More recent shared issues based on experiences that the community has dealt with include wildfire and smoke impacts, gentrification and affordable housing, and the loss of water rights to Wall Street. Also climate resilience. At the intersection of water and land use planning, our common concerns translate to the slate of water issues that we're currently addressing as a community through the many ongoing planning processes, most notably comprehensive planning, which is a county level process, zoning, watershed planning, critical areas, and shorelines master programs. As far as ecological constraints go, you might think that ecological values simply imply human and community values, but they also stand alone as critical indicators of the health of this place. The recently released State of the Salmon report showed in pretty alarming terms how Upper Columbia spring Chinook, steelhead, and other species are really affected directly by the quantity and quality of water available in our rivers and tributaries. We have a lot of different species of what I call charismatic megafauna, like wolves, that are supported in the valley. But mule deer provide a good example because the Methow Valley hosts the state's largest mule deer winter range. It's been shown that fragmenting landscapes with development affects the migration routes of deer and impacts their survival, especially in winter. And I don't have direct access to the data, but there's been a lot of recent studies, and I suspect that between the fires and our changing development patterns, the deer are starting to really feel it, and it's showing up in their population numbers. Wildfire. The Methow Valley is a fire-adapted ecosystem. The 2014 Carlton complex, a photo of which you are looking at, was the state's largest fire in 2014, and at that time was the largest fire in quite some time. This is a picture that I took in my backyard when I was trapped for 2 days behind this wall of smoke and fire with no way out. So it was kind of a real experience. The 2015 fire season said, "Hold my beer," and took the record again, and that sadly included fatalities. So back-to-back mega fires and predictions for more to come call to question our development patterns in what's called the wildland-urban interface, the safety of our first responders when they have to go to fires from which there may only be one way in and one way out, ways to manage the forest and shrub steppe, and ways to design our developments and plan for water in a way that mitigates for the known presence and the planned repeated presence of wildfire on the landscape. Remember that our water supply comes from snowpack. The UW Climate Impacts Group did some work specific to the Methow Valley, and their report was somewhat grim, although not entirely. In many ways, because of our northern latitude, the valley is in better shape than a lot of places. But the upshot of this slide and their reporting is that peak stream flow from snowmelt is occurring up to 20 days earlier now than in the entire period from 1948 to 2002. That pattern is predicted to get worse. And the change in our peak stream flow has obvious effects on our fish populations because they don't change their spawning seasons that readily. In recent years, we've had low snowpack in the valley, even when the crest gets a lot of snow. Snow melts earlier. We've had really dry March and April this year, and in recent years past, we've had a phenomenon of wells drying up, even as more houses are going in all around us. The current development regulations are at odds with our in-stream flow rule, which I'm about to get into, and that creates an interesting conflict that has, as of this past January, put a pause on most subdivisions and building permits in the valley. Some people consider this a blessing, others not so much. And that brings us to the legal constraints to growth. There's lots of rabbit holes I could go down here, so I'm noting all the legal constraints briefly in this one slide so I can focus on the Methow in-stream flow rule. We have the local regulatory framework at the county level, which is supposed to take the vision of the community and the limitations imposed by state law and recent court decisions and provide a land use template that finds the sweet spot and tells us where and how we can grow in the future. Add to this the moral and legal necessity of respecting and honoring the rights of sovereign tribes and the federally enforceable treaties that require government-to-government consultation. And there is another strong force that influences how much growth will be allowed to impact our already limited water resources. So here's our in-stream flow rule, otherwise known as WAC 173-548, otherwise known as the Matthau Rule. Forgive me if I use those terms interchangeably, and thanks to the Methow Watershed Council for letting me borrow part of their slideshow. which also has these fun transitions. So harken back to the 1976 plan and the common concerns expressed at that time. The Methow in-stream flow rule attempts to address those concerns. Oops, jumped ahead too fast. The rule has 3 parts. Base flows, reserves that are prioritized for domestic use, and restricted or closed basins. This is obviously the simplified version, but this is the basics of the Methow in-stream flow rule. So here's that map of the reaches again. Each reach has set base flows and is given a reserve of 2 CFS. So when I mentioned parts of the river running dry in the summer and low flows in the summer and winter, it's these base flows that are exceeded. That leads to interruption at the legal level, which means to the farmers, shut off your sprinklers. It has a big impact on farms, as you can imagine, and sometimes also on fire protection. The rule also established places where all water is said to be appropriated and no more is available. These areas have been subject to different restrictions on well drilling and development over the years. And I could go into ridiculous detail about that, but we'll leave that there. This is what's important. The rule sets aside a reserve of 2 CFS for each of the 7 reaches, so 14 cubic feet per second in total for the whole watershed, which is a lot compared to many other watersheds that have established reserves. Our reserve prioritizes who can use those 2 CFS per reach. In 1976, the decision was made to prioritize single domestic. Uh-oh, got to go back a slide. I don't know how to do that. Give me a sec. Shoot. That's not it. Pardon my pause. This little zoom bar is preventing me from going where I need to go. Oh, there it is. Good old arrow button. Okay. Let me get back. In 1976, the decision was made to prioritize single domestic use and stock watering and make everything else, including group use, a lower priority. So try to remember that. This means that when base flows get low, lower priority users are interruptible. As you can see, there's 62 water rights in the Methow River Basin that are subject to being interrupted. And out of the past 20 years, 12 of those years, people got letters telling them to shut off their sprinklers. So clearly it affects farmers who sometimes have to stop watering in the middle of the summer. It also affects the ability to subdivide and build houses. Since group uses are not the same as single domestic in the Matthau Rule, and subdivisions are considered group uses, that makes water for houses built in subdivisions interruptible. Since the State Department of Health rules won't allow homes to be built with an interruptible water supply, that further complicates matters. And then complicating matters even more, a 2016 court decision called the Hearst decision made counties responsible for ensuring legal water supply when they plan for growth. Over the years, while many in the watershed planning realm were aware of this issue with interruptible water rights, interruptible water supplies for some homes, the issue was ignored or forgotten by land use planners, other officials at the county, and most of the real estate and building industry in our area. So what happened next? This is getting into very recent history. MVCC has been sounding the alarm on this for a long time, as has FutureWise. We've been urging the county to stop approving subdivisions in the Methow until the issue could be unpacked and solutions developed with more people at the table. So far, well, until recently, the county had refused. Finally, this past January, the Attorney General for Ecology sent a letter to the county reinforcing ecology's interpretation that subdivisions as group uses do not have priority access to the reserves established in the in-stream flow rule. The letter recommended that the county discontinue approvals of subdivisions as well as building permits on some lots. The county responded by suing ecology, but they did at the same time also put in place temporary moratoria on subdivisions and building permits to avoid getting more landowners caught in the middle. Because the county commissioners are at odds with ecology's interpretation, what they say in public is sometimes at odds with the policies that they're putting in place, which has contributed to widespread confusion about what is allowed to happen where and who is affected. So looking at potential solutions, this is MVCC's perspective, and it's shared by a number of others, but not everyone. This is not the only place where a convergence of real and legal limitations has stalled development and forced a reckoning related to water issues. So we are turning to other places for lessons that might be applicable here, educating ourselves and spreading the word about ways that this important work can take place in a constructive and collaborative fashion that can keep values and ecological constraints at the fore. Current and reliable data is going to be really important. A shared view of legal constraints would be helpful. On this one, I would say stay tuned, watch the papers, join MVCC. We talk about it all the time. And so that was kind of a heavy introduction to the Methow and our resource constraints and our values and one really complex legal issue we're dealing with. And with my remaining time, I would like to spend just a few minutes letting you know about an outside threat that we've been dealing with recently too. And that is the issue of out-of-basin water rights transfers. If you read the Seattle Times last fall, you may have come across some articles about Wall Street coming for our state's water. The threat is real. California and Colorado water futures are now being traded on the Chicago Mercantile, making our increasingly scarce public resource a commodity that investors can make money on. The primary consequence of out-of-basin transfers is that water will never come back for use in this watershed for farms or development. Once water is moved downstream, the price tag on that water goes up. Transferring water back upstream to the basin of origin is economically unrealistic and legally difficult. Upstream watersheds like ours, which have no upstream from which to get more water, can literally dry up over time. Those little farms from earlier in the presentation would not survive in this environment. This applies also to almost all rivers in eastern Washington that drain to the Columbia. So it's not isolated to the Methow or Okanogan basins, but we have kind of been the poster children for recent issues related specifically to Wall Street corporations. Since water is also a private property right, it's important to respect the rights of farmers with senior water rights to sell them and receive fair market value. Most farmers in this region are also conservationists at heart who want to protect the future of farming, and they need options besides selling to the highest bidder. So solutions that we've attempted so far included a legislative attempt to prohibit out of water, RIA means water resource inventory area. Watershed works just fine. Out of watershed water right transfers. So last year and during the current legislative session, a really diverse and unusual coalition that included environmentalists, the Farm Bureau, local elected officials, and others, including many town mayors, tried to get legislation to restrict the transfers of water out of the basin of origin, at least in eastern Washington. This effort also included provisions to use local governments to establish water banks that could serve as an alternative to Wall Street's proposal and buy water rights that would only stay in the watershed and be available for the other farmers. Both of these measures were widely popular at the local level, but have been very difficult to shepherd through the statewide legislative process. The way that a local agricultural water bank would work would involve either purchasing or leasing water from farmers and providing it to other farmers in the same watershed. Water that is leased or sold to the bank would be held in the state's trust water rights program, remaining in stream until it is put to use by another farm downstream. Putting water rights in the trust protects them from being relinquished for non-use. It also puts more water in the river until it's needed, which is beneficial for fish. We hope to see this concept modeled at a pilot scale in the next year in Okanogan County, pending the outcome of current budget negotiations between the House and Senate. And that's what I got. I know I covered a lot of ground. I hope it wasn't too complicated or boring. So please let me know if you have any questions. If it gets too far into laws about water banking, I might have to take a pause until I can get an expert to help me answer your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. And so now we're going to open it up to questions. You can just type it in the chat and we'll kind of field them to Laura. And then Laura, are you okay with extensive questions being sent to your email for answers?
Oh, that's fine. That's why I posted it. I figured I might stump folks. And it's taken me years to think about a lot of this stuff.
No, that was a wonderful presentation.
The phone number listed there is the main office number, and I do exist at an extension, and they just changed it. So I'm pretty confident if you dial the number because you just want to chat, you can leave a message at the appropriate extension and I'll call you back.
Wonderful. And I actually have questions coming in. So we will start with Brendan's. And Brendan's asking, what is the law in other states that has allowed water rights to be sold externally? And then is there such a law here in Washington yet?
I don't know if I know the answer to that. What I will say is that after last year's legislative session and our various attempts to deal with this issue, the only bill that passed was a bill to allow ecology to convene a working group to study this issue. And as part of those discussions took place last summer, and I sat in on them, and it was pretty intimidating because there were big water rights lawyers from all over the state, including corporate ones. And when the issue of, should we be trying to stop out of state entities from buying our water, there was a big outcry from a lot of those folks saying we can't limit anybody from buying water. It's a property right. And so as far as I know, there is no limit in this state. I'm not sure about other states. If there's any state that actually limits the ability of outside entities to buy water rights.
Okay. And then I'm going to field the questions in the order that they came. And then a question from Xander. It seems that community consensus about these contentious issues can be rare. Is there something special going on in the Methow?
I've wondered about that because when I put together these numbers and I reviewed the older studies and just saw this common thread of what we're concerned about and what we think needs to happen, I realized, there's some longtime locals, but there's been a lot of demographic change. And so it really is surprising in a way that even the folks who are fairly new here will quickly grasp what's going on. And I think in a way, it's the landscape maybe and the character of the place that grabs people. It's a very cooperative community. I mean, I've also heard, I was told by an old timer that you folks in the Methow will fight over the distance between mile markers. And so there's that too, but I guess we're not afraid to get in the arguments and find the common ground. So maybe that's another thing that's special about us.
Okay, and the next question is from Alexander. Can you tell us more about water banking and how it could be used to help alleviate the water issues in the Methow?
Sure. And I am still very much on a learning curve about this too. And it can be as complicated as you want it to be, but so the agricultural water bank was one solution that was posed for the very specific problem, and probably some other problems too, related to trying to preserve the future of farming and especially small scale agriculture. So if we were able to get a local agricultural water bank up and running and buy some of these senior water rights or lease them, another thing that it allows, besides keeping the water inside the basin where it can be used, is the possibility of rewatering some landscapes, because there's places in the valley where, for example, somebody bought land and then didn't realize that if you don't use it for 5 years, you relinquish that. So land that was former farm ground now has one house on it, and it's a big dry field full of weeds waiting to catch on fire. If in the future it becomes profitable and desirable for a young farmer to lease a portion of that land, they could lease water rights from the bank and rewater that property and use it to grow food for the local population or produce products for regional markets. So that's just one opportunity with the ag water bank. And then with the other type of water bank that could be a real rabbit hole to go down is the type I was talking about, problems other counties have faced and that we're dealing with for development. That's a different kind of water bank where you buy rights or use water storage projects and other things to help create seed a water bank that could be then used by developers who would have to purchase rights in order to subdivide here. I hope that wasn't too complicated. That takes a little more unpacking.
All right, thank you, Laura. And any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or go to the Q&A, and then you can ask it and it will pop up and we can field them. Okay. And we got a question from Brendan. What advice would you give to anyone who might want to set up a similar water bank / local water coalition in their own area?
I think diversity is really important. I mean, it's been pretty challenging. This issue with the out of basin transfers is a really good example because we're just such small potatoes in the whole scheme of the state and water issues. But being able to go to legislators with both Democrats and Republicans, both conservationists, environmentalists, the Farm Bureau, county commissioners, you know, I'm arguing with the same county commissioners about our development issues, but we went to the legislators together with our hats in our hands as a coalition, an informal coalition, who agreed on that this is common ground, that we don't want to lose water rights and we have solutions and we have vetted the solutions with the community, and they support all of our values. And so I think finding diverse people who support a singular enough objective is a really good place to start. And if you want to talk more about that, feel free to get in touch with me personally. I love working on coalition building.
Any more questions?
Looks like I might be off the hook.
Again, if you guys have any more questions that are viewing, feel free to shoot Laura an email. There's her contact information that's up on the slide there. And then
I'll put it back.
it'll be back up here momentarily.
There we go.
And then thank you so much, Laura, again, for presenting. This is a great talk. And thank you so much for kicking off our Earth Week series.
You're welcome. It was an honor to be here.
All right. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I think we can call the talk. And please feel free to tune in the remainder of the week as we have a series of speakers lined up to celebrate Earth Week and then on Earth Day as well. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us.